Baron Trump's Marvelous Underground Journey, Chapter 23, Lord Hothead Again, and this time a fuller account of him, his wondrous tales concerning the Culticorps, where they came from, who they were, and how they managed to live in this world of eternal frost, the many questions I put to him, and his answers in full. Lord Bullebrain was never allowed to set foot inside the Palace of Ice. King Gladys, backed by the opinion of his favorites, still indulged the belief that he would be able, in the end, to refrigerate him. True, he had been many years at the task, so that it had now become a sort of hobby of his, and almost daily did his frigid majesty pay a visit to his hot-headed subject and test his temperature by pressing a small ball of ice against his temples. To King Gladys's mind, a man of so high a temperature was a continual menace to the peace and quiet of his kingdom. What if Lord Hothead, in a dream, should wander forth some night and fall asleep with his back against one of the walls of the ice palace? Might he not melt away enough of it to throw the whole glorious fabric into a slump and slush of debris? It was terrible to think of, when he did think of it, and he thought of it quite often. But Bullebrain had no terrors for me, nor for Bulger either. In fact, Bulger was delighted to be stroked by a warm hand, and he and Bullebrain and I soon became the very best friends. But his frigid majesty was so alarmed when he heard of this friendship that he was seized with quite a spasm of warmth. For, thought he, the united heat of 3 hotheads might work some terrible harm to the welfare of his people. So he issued the coldest kind of decree, carved on a tablet of ice, that Bullebrain and I should on no one day pass more than half an hour together, that we should never touch palm to palm, sleep in the same room, eat from the same dish, or sit in the same divan. These regulations were annoying, but I followed them to the letter, and when King Gladys saw how careful I was to yield the strictest obedience to his decree, he conceived a genuine affection for me, and sent several magnificent pelts to the ice house, which had been assigned to Bulger and me, for of course it would not have been safe for us to lodge in the palace itself, but his frigid majesty held out the flattering prospect that the very moment Bulger and I should become properly refrigerated, apartments in the palace would be assigned to us, and in fact that I should be permitted to eat at the royal table. Who are the Culticorps? Where did these strange folk come from? How did they ever find their way down into this world of eternal frost? And above all, where did they get their food and clothing from? These were a few of the questions which I was so impatient to have answered, that my temperature was raised a whole degree, and I was obliged to sleep with only one single pelt between me and my divan of crystal ice. For a man bred and born in so cold a country as the land of the Culticorps, Bullebrain had an extremely quick and active mind. On account of his rapid heartbeat and the consequent high temperature of his body, he was not able to do his writing on slabs of ice as other learned Culticorps had done, for it would not have been a pleasant thing for him to see a poem which he had just finished literally melt away in his hands, without so much as leaving an ink stain behind. So he had been obliged, with King Gladys's permission, to do his writing on thin tablets of alabaster. Before he began to talk to me about the progenitors of the Culticorps, he showed me a map of the country in the upper world once inhabited by them, and traced for me the course they had sailed upon, abandoning that country and described the beautiful shores they had landed upon in their search for a new home. I saw at a glance that it was Greenland, which Bullibrain was thus unconsciously describing, and knowing as I did that in past ages Greenland had been a land of blue skies, warm winds, green meadows, and fertile valleys, before moving mountains of ice came down from the north and crushed all life out of it. I listened with breathless intent to his wonderful tales of its beautiful lakes, nestled at the foot of vine-clad mountains, all of which Bullibrain now looked upon in fair visions, inherited from his ancestors, and I also knew that it must have been the Arctic Ocean, which had been traversed by the ships of the Koltykwerps, who had then landed upon the, in those days, sunny shores of northern Russia. But the mountains of ice could sail too, and they followed the fleeing Koltykwerps like mighty monsters, dashing themselves with terrible roar and crash upon the peaceful shores, which they soon transformed into a wilderness of berg, of glacier, and of foe. Only a handful of the Koltykwerps survived, and these, in their dumb despair, taking refuge in the clefts and caverns of the North Urals, could, from their hiding places, look upon one of the strangest sights that had ever greeted human eyes. So rapid had been the advance of these mighty masses of ice, crashing against the mountain sides and rending the very rocks in their fury, that the air gave up its warmth, and the sun was powerless to give it back again. The animals of the wild wood and the beasts of the field, overtaken in their flight, perished as they ran and stood there stark and stiff, with heads uptossed and muscles knotted. Them by the thousands and 10 times thousands, the crushed crystals of the pursuing floods caught up like moss and leaves in a mountain torrent, and packed in every cave and cavern on the way, tearing broader and loftier portals into these subterranean chambers, so that they might do their work the better. And these, then, O Bullibrain, are your meat quarries? I exclaimed, whence ye draw your daily food? Even so, little baron, replied the hot-headed Koltykwerp, and not only our food, but the skins which serve us so admirably for clothing in this cold underground world, and the oil too which burns in our beautiful alabaster lamps, besides 100 other things, such as bone for helves and handles, horn for needles, and buttons and eating utensils, wool for the weaving of our undergarments, and magnificent pelts of bear and seal and walrus, which, laid upon our benches and divans of crystal ice, transform them into beds and couches which even an inhabitant of thy world might envy. But, O Bullibrain, I cried out, have ye not almost exhausted these supplies? Will not death from starvation soon stare ye all in the face of these deep and icy caverns of the underworld, visited by the sun's light, yet unwarmed by it? Nay, little baron, answered Bullibrain, with a smile almost as warm as one of my own, let not that thought give thee a moment's alarm, for we have as yet barely raised the lid of this icebox of nature's packing. We are not large eaters in any way, continued Lord Hothead, for while it is true that we are not indolent people, for his frigid majesty's palace and our dwellings need constant repair, and new hatchets and axes must be chipped out in the flint quarries, and new lamps carved and new garments woven, yet it is also true that we take life rather easy. We have no enemies to slay, no quarrels to settle, no gold to fight over, no land to drive out our fellow creatures from and fence in, nor can we be ill if we were willing to be, for in this pure, cold, crisp air disease would try in vain to sow her poison. Germs, hence, needing no doctors, we have none, as we have no lawyers either, or merchants to sell us what belongs to us already. His frigid majesty is an excellent king, I never read of a better one. I doubt that his like exists in the upper world. Always cool-headed, no thought of conquest, no dreams of power, no longings for empty pomp and show ever enter his mind. Since the day his father died, and we set the great Koltikorp, crown of crystal ice, upon his cool brow, his temperature has never risen but half a degree, and that was only for a brief hour or so, and was occasioned by a mad proposal of one of his counselors, who claimed that he had discovered an explosive compound, something like the gunpowder of thy world, I fancy, by which he could shatter the glorious window of rock crystal set in the mountain dome of our underworld and let in the warm sunshine. Did his frigid majesty, Gelidas, put this daring Koltikorp to death? I asked. Oh dear, no, replied Bullebrain. He merely ordered him to be refrigerated for so many hours a day until all his feverish projects had been chilled to death. For no doubt, little baron, a man of thy deep learning knows full well that all the ills which thy world suffers from are the children of fevered brains, of minds made restless and visionary by the high temperature of the blood which gallops through the approaches to the dome of thought, stirring up wild dreams and visions as thy sun lifts the poisonous vapor from the stagnant pool. The more I listened to Bullebrain, the more I liked him. The fact of the matter is, I preferred to sit in his narrow cell with its plain walls of ice, lighted up by a single alabaster lamp, and converse with him, to loitering in the splendid throne room of his frigid majesty, King Gelidas. But Bulger had discovered that the pelts of Princess Schneeball's divan were much thicker, softer, and warmer than the single one allowed Lord Hothead, and therefore he preferred spending his time with her. But fearing lest he might get into mischief, I didn't dare to leave him alone with the princess too long at a time. Now, one of the things that they do discover is the larger brains are good for producing heat.